I remember when you and I became friends, you were like heavier and just like red. You were just red all the time.
Like a tomato?
Yeah.
Irish.
Is that Irish? That red hair, you had that.
The old dirty Irishman.
Oh my God, bro.
Oh gosh. I feel like I smoked a crack rock. I took some NyQuil daytime.
Oh, we're
Wired.
No,
Okay,
I'm
fantastic.
gonna get in the truck on the way home and I'm just gonna lean back and go out.
I'm
Every time I come to Birmingham, dude, I feel fine. I wake up the next morning and I feel like my horse kicked me in my face. My throat is itchy.
Yeah.
It's Birmingham, as Lee says.
Birmingham.
Welcome to Birmingham.
Who says that?
Lee Domain. His funny is Lee will be
Oh.
Lee will
anywhere
be,
he is.
he will be he could be speaking somewhere in Napa Valley, give zero context, but he'll go, "Yeah, I'm from Birmingham, Alabama."
People probably think
They're like,
that's the name of it, or that he doesn't know how to pronounce it.
That's just weird.
Birmingham.
With all due respect to him.
That's just weird. But Lee, I need your money.
Hey, how long have you been running 1010 Project?
5 years.
5 years. 5 years. And how long has this joker back here behind me been in 1010? You just joined it?
October? Is it October? September? Yeah, September.
How many pastors have you run through it?
105.
It's awesome.
And we've got,
Since it started?
yeah.
I was in class 1.
You were in
Yeah.
one, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then,
It's changed my life.
Is that when
Yeah.
you got saved?
yeah,
That was when I
that's when we broke them spirits off him. And then, yeah. Yeah. And then we'll do about, I think probably about 60 this year. Hopefully. God willing.
God willing.
Lord willing.
Oh wow. What how did it start? How did it originate? I mean,
Is this
obviously
the
I know a lot of
podcast?
stories. Yeah.
Oh, all
We were
right.
just talking.
I didn't know if you were going to do like an intro or like.
We don't
no
do
intros.
intros. You don't even need an introduction, Joshua Turner. Soon to be
My
doctor.
next guest, what is his David Letterman's name? My next guest needs no introduction.
Yeah.
That's you today.
Yeah.
Soon to be Doctor
Yeah.
Josh Turner. I'm not calling you doctor.
Yeah. You can call me Doc, like Doc Holliday. That's all I'm going for.
Doc.
That's why you're getting your doctorate.
That's why I got my doctorate. No, April 25th. Yeah, I graduated with my doctorate. April 8th, book comes out.
That's a big accomplishment. That's
It's
like
a big
1%
year.
of the world, right?
I don't know.
It's not a lot.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Yeah.
How are they passing you through this? I don't understand that because I know you.
Dude, I'm a deep well of knowledge and wisdom that you have just scratched the surface on.
I'm like we've been best friends for a long time.
Really long time. Yeah.
I'm like, he's breaking out books of common prayer and praying over pastors today. And I'm like, who is this guy?
When I got off
He's
stage,
been
you
too
go,
long in academia.
my little liturgical monk friend is what you said.
I'm getting you a robe for your next birthday.
I want a collar. That's why I want a collar.
No,
Clergy
I want
collar.
you wearing a monk robe and keep the little beanie on. You can have your teeny weeny beanie and your monk robe.
I don't like that sentence at all. So 1010, your original question. So we started it in 2020 and you were actually there and
You basically called your friend and said, "Hey, we're going to try this thing out on you, right?"
Yeah, I was like, we need to fix Jason Laird. No, so 8 years ago, I started something with Brad Lominick called Young Guns. We started taking pastors up to Colorado to ride horses for 3 days and talking about how to not blow up your life. I call it the Joel Osteen of like mental health. It's just that toe in the water, just that first little step. And so it was good. And then 2020, I took one of my good friends, and he had previously had a moral failure and was very open about it. And anytime someone has a moral failure, I don't really care about what they did. The question I always ask is, what got you there?
Yeah.
How did you get there?
great.
And so he was really open about it. And so you were there, we roomed together that week, and I watched him for 3 days pastor
It was incredible.
all these guys. And there were like 6 of us that had been like through some pretty traumatic church stuff. And we all sat in a room that night and just like wept with him as he pastored us. And 3 weeks later, he took his own life. And I talked to him the morning of that he took his life and would have had no idea.
Wow.
Like zero.
It was one of the most shocking things.
Actually, Pastor Dino called me about it. And it's still kind of hard to reconcile. I have some theories that we won't talk about, but like, I just started realizing like in that moment and Tyler Reagan, who I started 1010 with, he called me and was like, dude, we got to do something. That was the third pastor in a year that we knew had taken his life. And so we started looking at it and going, all right, man, if Jesus says his yoke is easy and his burden's light, what are we doing wrong? Not that ministry should always be easy, but it shouldn't end like this.
Yeah.
And so we started looking across the landscape of what was offered for pastors and people out there. And you really found one of two things, right? One is the only stuff out there for pastors is after they've already gone off the rails a little bit, or they've already burned out, or whatever the case may be, or everything was just a 3 to 5 day retreat away, and which is relief, which is good. Like we all need that from time to time. I'm not dogging that, but there is a massive difference between relief and resilience. And if you're constantly looking for relief, but never dealing with the thing that you need relief from, you're going to continually need more and more and more relief.
Wow.
And at some point it's like, it's like a drug. What once worked isn't going to work anymore. So you have to do more. And I think that's ultimately what leads guys into moral failure, whatever that moral failure is, because they end up having to keep finding new things that give them that sense of relief that leads them into like a broken.
Wow.
I saw something that, I don't know if it was on your website or if it was one of the, maybe it's that piece that you sent me earlier today. It said Prehab.
Yeah.
Is that,
yeah. So we say we run a prehab. Like when you look for most things for most pastors, it's rehab. It's after, or you're already in a bad spot, or you're already a little, whatever. And so I just like, why do we have to wait till someone gets there?
Yeah.
Like, can't we help someone have healthy rhythms, healthy practices, teach them that on the front end so they don't have to go through the pain, so they don't have to blow up their family, so they don't have to like
drag their church through it.
Drag their church through it and all that sort of stuff. And so we try to get guys on the front end. You're not burned out. You might just be a little overheated.
Yeah.
And so like
let's pull you down a little bit.
Yeah. Let's pump the brakes a little bit and make sure you're doing better.
That's interesting.
Talk about what that looks like, the cohort, the whole year.
Yeah. So we take guys through a year-long process. We do it because it takes time to build resilience. It takes time to work through things. And so I tell everybody we're probably in iteration triple Z at this point. And so we had all these ideas of starting, especially me being in ministry for so long as well. And what we realized is that there really needs to be a process. And we were trying to figure out what is the process we build. And last year I got connected with Biola University. And so Biola University, come to find out, Biola in Notre Dame for 15 years has been studying pastors. Wow. And they had been studying what causes pastors to burn out, not stay healthy, struggle with anxiety, depression, and then what helps them flourish in ministry and become resilient. And so what we did is we took their 15 years of data and research and put it through our entire program. So a year, it's in a cohort model. So for instance, we got a group starting in March. So in March, there are anywhere from 8 to 10 guys in a cohort, and that cohort has one coach that walks with them through the entire year. So they go on a trip. That trip starts in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. We go, you went on that one. We go,
it's crazy.
It's an awesome trip. We go snowmobiling, but I tell everybody, dude, I'm just taking you snowmobiling to get you to have some honest conversations.
Yeah.
So at night,
say the phrase. I love the phrase you say.
We give pastors a safe place to say dangerous things.
It's awesome.
Great.
And so at night, after all the fun stuff, the guys sit in their cohort and they have a conversation with their coach. And we have what we called a field guide that we wrote that is 120 pages long, based off of all of the content from Biola University. And so the coach has guiding questions. And the first trip is just about telling your story.
Yeah.
Who are you? What's going on? What are you struggling with? Like all the things that we all naturally.
You find that for the most part, the pastors, they're willing on that first trip to
I'll
share?
tell you the funniest one to me is this was I think it was last year, and I'm just sitting in there. I don't really coach anymore, and so one of the coaches is sitting. It's the second night with all the guys, and he goes, "All right, guys," he goes, in 5 years, if you've been removed from ministry and we're sitting down eating together, what's the reason you've been removed from ministry?
Great question.
And
what a question.
And I'm like, and this is like the second night, and I'm like, oh, dude, nobody's gonna be honest in this moment. And one dude goes, bro, women. And I was like, oh Lord, we're in it now.
He knew.
Dude. And so
What does that do with the rest of the group when someone's that vulnerable and honest and candid?
It opens up the rest of the group.
Yeah.
And because he said it also with such emotion, and such honesty. And,
broke down the wall.
the first night of 1010, I share my story or we have a coach share their story. And so what we're always trying to help guys understand is we are modeling transparency for you.
Yeah.
And if you want people to be transparent that you're leading, you also have to lead with transparency.
Yeah.
Now, there is a difference between healthy transparency and unhealthy transparency. Yeah. And so the stuff that I'm transparent about is, some stuff I'm still working through, but it's at a level that I have walked through some things and healed.
Yeah.
And so unhealthy transparency is when you are like sharing things out of anger, bitterness, whatever. So we're always pushing for healthy transparency. So they go on that first trip, they tell their story. After that first trip, they transition to content videos. So we have filmed this past year, probably about 18 content videos. Some are me and the head of the psychology department at Biola. Then there's probably about 10 that are me and 4 guys, 2 spiritual directors, a therapist, and a theologian.
Sounds like a beginning of a joke.
Yeah. And so we're having conversations around all the different topics of flourishing in ministry and really just having really honest conversations about it. And, we're probably saying some things that are going to grate against guys. Because Richard Rohr has this quote, he says, so much about transformation is about unlearning just as much as it is about learning.
It's good.
Yeah.
And so many of us in the ministry world, we're ingrained with certain things. You and I have talked about it for years. We're ingrained with certain things. And sometimes those things that we're ingrained with have nothing to do with Christianity. They just have to do with culture.
Yeah.
And so what we've learned is there's some things that we have to push against. And that pushing may be uncomfortable, but we're trying to help you reorient to that there's a healthy way to do church.
Yeah.
So they'll watch the content videos on their own, offline, and then in the field guide we wrote, each week there are different exercises we're asking you to do. So they do the exercises, and then they do a Zoom call once a month with their cohort and their coach. So they'll do that for 5 months. We also have some different assessments that they'll take at 6 months in. We do our second trip. Our second trip is a counseling intensive.
Oh, yeah.
And so we have 4 to 5 therapists that work for us.
It's truly remarkable.
It is.
It changed my life.
It is. I remember.
He's going next year, right? Maybe, possibly.
Who knows?
Get this man a Chick-fil-A scholarship.
Yeah, we get that Lord's biscuit. So we do a counseling intensive with the guys, and we do a mix of teaching and then also letting the guys work through stuff. We used to use another organization, and what we found is that most pastors have not done any sort of therapy. And dude, when you've not done any sort of therapy and then you go to a counseling intensive,
you're in for a treat.
And it can be a lot.
Yeah.
It can be way too much. And so you can actually re-traumatize people if they're not ready to go places. Like for instance, when I went through this other counseling place, which is a phenomenal place, it just wasn't what we needed. I remember the counselor pushing a guy in my group so far that he left. He left the building. He goes, I got to go for a walk, and just walked out. And I was like, I don't think this is right.
Yeah.
And so now what we do is really a good mix of teaching and letting the guys basically, what's your next step?
Yeah.
Counseling and intensives, they're not about a cathartic moment like a middle school altar call.
Yeah.
They're not to get you to this place of you sobbing and weeping and then you're fixed.
Which I think is an expectation people have.
Yeah.
And I think we want it.
Yeah.
We want to go in and be like, oh, I feel better. And because obviously when you cry or you whatever, you feel better afterwards. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that you've actually healed.
Yeah. You past it.
You just had a moment. You had a moment.
You had a moment. Yeah. And so, we tell guys if they go there, like you and I, when we were going through it, the counselor made us look at each other. I'm sobbing, you're sobbing. And it's good. But what we're trying to help guys understand is we want this to be the beginning of a life of therapy for you. And
from my time there,
yeah,
one of the counselors has become a counselor, and I meet with him regularly.
Yeah,
since I went to and it's transformed my life.
Yeah, he's awesome too.
Let me ask you this though: I don't think most people see therapy as something they need for a lifetime. I feel like most people think it's something they need in seasons.
Yeah, and I think there are times where it can be seasons. I haven't met with my therapist in probably 4 months. because I'm kind of in a good place right now. But as things come up, I have a therapist that I can go to and be like, yo, I need to process this. And you and I've talked about it. I also have a spiritual director that I meet with. And what I've learned is, for me, I'm kind of in the place where I'm leaning more into a spiritual director. And the difference between those, if no one's ever heard that term, which I had never heard it for a while, is, if a counselor is like prescribing to you, this is what you do, a spiritual director is actually helping you kind of assess what is the Holy Spirit saying to you and doing in your life in this season. So the guys in 1010, they'll do that therapy retreat. Some of them, like, you're like, dog, you need to stay in therapy. And then they go back to the Zoom calls, the content videos, the field guide, and then they end with a trip. So this group that's starting in March, they will end in South Texas shooting hogs out of helicopters. And which is
what a change.
It's a lot of fun. And so what's really cool is the field.
So you mix, just so everybody knows, you mix adventure with actual deep work. Yeah.
So really what I say we do is adventure, spiritual formation, and mental health. Like that's what we do. And the reason we use adventure is because for men, which is just for men right now, we're working on a women's side of it. But men, they build relationships shoulder to shoulder. And it helps them have honest conversations. And so the adventure piece is, and it's just important to have fun, dude. Like there is a part where like you need it. Holy leisure. Do something fun that like re-energize. It's just fun and it's good for your soul. And so, but the field guide, what it ends up culminating in is a rule of life. And so we basically, the first 6 months, we're helping you unlearn some things, helping you see what the data says about what would cause you to burn out, struggle with anxiety, depression. And then the last 6 months is helping you build the resilient practices off of flourishing in ministry, which is 4 areas of flourishing that we measure, which is thriving, authenticity, resilience, and well-being. And so
break those down a little bit.
So there's different things up under each one. And so when you get into thriving and authenticity, all of them have a relational component to it. So when you look at any research from Lifeway, Barna, Pew Research, I think the percentage, I may quote this wrong, but it's, I think like 76% of pastors say that they do not have somebody they could call in an emergency.
Wow.
And then 80% of families say that ministry has had a negative impact on their family. And so there's always this relational element to it. And then there's always a boundaries element to it as well, whether it is emotional or just normal physical, intellectual boundaries. There's so many things that play into those 4 areas. Authenticity also being one of them. Well-being is actually the first thing to go. So what well-being is you ever have those days where you're like, I just had a good day. I don't really know I had a good day. I just had a great day. Well-being, the way you measure well-being is, do you have more good days than bad days? Because it takes longer to get over bad days than it does good days. So when you start having more bad days than good days, your well-being naturally decreases, and it's really the first thing to go, and you can measure it. And there's certain things you can do to increase it. So really what we're helping guys do is in these 4 areas, where are you? So the guys will all take a flourishing in ministry assessment the first month of 1010. And then they'll take that same assessment 15 months later.
Wow, that's cool.
And what's that? Are y'all seeing like major increase in?
We just started it this year, so we haven't run long enough to be able to, like, I would say, come up with like a formula of what we're seeing. What I would say that we have seen a lot, and the research shows this, is that the research shows that pastors are massively unaware of their own emotions. They don't know why they feel what they feel. And they don't know why they do what they do.
Is that just pastors? Or you
I think it's men.
I was curious about that.
I think it's men.
Yeah.
I think it's men in general. And part of the study that Biola did is also based off of the study that Harvard did on human flourishing. And I think a lot of it's men. Like my wife makes a joke. She always goes, you have 2 emotions, happy and angry. And because for me, everything, fear, worry, doubt, insecurity comes out as anger.
Yeah, because anger is a secondary emotion, right?
Anger is always a secondary emotion. And so what we're trying to help guys do is realize, okay, when you feel angry, so there's a whole week where we have a feelings wheel. And
God, I hate those things.
I know, but we're trying to help you understand, what are you really feeling?
Yeah.
Because if we can really get to what you're feeling, then we can deal with that. But just saying like, I'm angry or I'm mad, that's not.
Yeah.
You're probably actually just disappointed.
Yeah, you're
Or
just disappointed.
really sad about something.
Yeah. And so it's helping guys recognize that and then being like, what are you sad about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
That's great.
and some guys it's like, dude, I'm disappointed in God. Okay, well, let's talk about that.
Yeah. That's great.
It's so funny that in like the Christian world, church space, whatever, how much we villainize your like
the negative emotions.
The negative emotions when they're just indicators.
Yeah.
Well, and two, here's the other thing we're taught. Like we've all heard Jeremiah 17:9. Your heart is deceitful and wicked above all else, so don't trust it. We've taught that. I've been taught that. The problem with that is that's not what it says in the Hebrew. So what it says in the Hebrew is that your heart
Break
is
it down, doctor.
So what it says in the Hebrew is your heart is treacherous. That does not mean, just because something is treacherous does not mean it is evil or wicked.
Yeah.
It means you need help navigating it. Yeah. Why, if our heart is deceitful and wicked above all else and don't trust it, why would God also say, guard your heart?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's treacherous.
Yeah.
The problem is when you're taught that it's evil and wicked and you shouldn't trust anything that comes out of it, anytime you have a feeling, whether good or bad, you're like, well, I can't trust this. This is my heart.
Yeah.
No, dude, you just need help navigating that.
I love
and the way you navigate that is with the Lord.
Yeah, I love my introduction to all of this was Pete Scazzera, Emotional Healthy Spirituality.
For sure. Yeah.
And I love, he talks about spiritual maturity cannot be separated from emotional maturity.
No.
And that book changed the game and really opened the door to me for all of these things that you're talking about.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious. I want to go back to something you said at the very, very beginning of this conversation.
Yeah.
When you talked about
now it's a podcast, boys. We didn't know where we started, but we're getting
somewhere
into it.
now.
Yeah.
You talked about what made you want to start all of this was looking at scriptures and saying where Jesus said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So what are we doing that's wrong?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think you also see in scriptures where Paul talks about, I was beaten, I was shipwrecked, I was stoned.
Yeah.
He lists all these hardships that he walked through. And then he says, on top of this, I carry a burden for the church as well.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, Doc, how do you reconcile those two?
I know, that's a great question.
And then when do you know, I don't know if this goes along with the well-being, but like the hard is actually, it's not just hard, but it's gone to a dangerous place now.
Because hard's not always bad.
Yeah, hard's not always bad.
Yeah, but when is it bad?
Yeah, I mean, golly, dude, there's a lot of different answers to that question.
Yeah.
And I think that every person, what unhealthy looks like for them that comes out of hard, right? Like if you don't handle hard the right way, with the Lord, with healthy boundaries. And when I say healthy boundaries, I don't mean going and sitting in the woods Indian style in Jesus's lap. Like I don't mean not doing the job.
Crawl up into Daddy God's lap.
Father God, Daddy God. I tell you one time I was preaching at a church and a dude prayed for me and hit me with 3 Daddy Gods in one prayer. Woo. I didn't even know what to do, bro. I was like, oh man, I can't preach after that. But I think if you don't handle hard the right way, and I'm not saying ministry isn't hard.
Yeah.
It's always going to be hard. We're pushing back darkness. We're fighting against stuff. I think so much hard comes because we have the wrong idea of what our responsibility is in it. And I think what I mean by that is like when you are taught you have to do it and you've got to come through and you've got to work hard enough and you've got to build it and you've got to show up and you've got to whatever. Yes, part of that is true. But if you lose the thread that Jesus is the one doing this through you, it will become about what you are able to produce and not about what the Lord is able to produce through you.
Yeah.
So when you get sideways on that stuff, then it becomes about what you can do to advance the kingdom of God. And dude, we can't do anything to advance the kingdom of God without Jesus. And so the unhealth in guys shows up in a ton of different ways. So I can look at a guy and I can look at his schedule and tell you pretty much how healthy he is based off of what his weekly schedule looks like. Wow. Then you can look at coping mechanisms. All of us have, I just call it our favorite sin. All of us have our favorite sin. What do you do when you get unhealthy that's the thing you go to?
Yeah.
That is the easiest thing for you to go to.
It's an escape, right?
Yeah. And so I listened to a sermon by Tim Keller on Sunday, and he was talking about idols. And he talked about it. He was talking to a group of pastors, and he talked about idols for pastors. And he said, some of you in here, you don't even know it. The idol is your church.
Ooh.
The idol is your sermon. The idol, and he just goes in and he goes, how do you know what an idol is? He goes, an idol is the thing that if you lost it, you wouldn't know who you are anymore. And he said, for so many of you, that's not Jesus.
Wow.
He said, it's your identity, it's your platform, it's your preaching, it's your ability, it's your whatever. And so I think unhealth can look a lot of different ways. I am not the dude, and this is always my fear a little bit when I talk about 10-10 with guys. We're not the organization that's like, listen, we are teaching liturgical practices and we are teaching spiritual disciplines like the prayer of examine and contemplation and silence and solitude and Sabbath and all these things, because that's what the research shows. The research shows that these practices have been around for a really long time because they produce something in us.
Yeah.
And they produce something in us, and they've been around for hundreds of years because they produce something in us. And so what happens is I'm not the guy that's like, just go do that. Just go seek the face of Daddy God and see what he like. No, dude, we're going to get to work.
Yeah.
We're going to do what God's called us to, but there is a way that God has called us to do it. It's the quote I said earlier. Dallas Willard says, the most important thing in your life is not about what you do. It's about who you become as you do it.
It's great.
Yeah.
And I think I lost it. Mm-hmm. I remember when everything happened at our old church in Orlando, and
which for people, they may not know this. I mean, you planted basically 2 churches, over 2,000, blew up, and then take it from there.
Yeah, and so I'll just say this way. No, my pastor went a different direction I couldn't get on board with, and so I was resigned / fired. And I remember everything was taken from me on a Sunday. I'd been at this church for 17 years. I was kind of the heir apparent to take over. And I remember looking at my wife and going, I don't know who I am anymore. And what I realized, and here's the reality, my church was an idol.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I loved ministry more than I loved Jesus.
Wow.
And I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't make a decision of that. It just crept in.
Yeah.
It creeps in.
Yeah.
And so how do you always do things that are always reorienting you back to Jesus as you're doing what God has called you to do?
Yeah. I love
that's why I love, I mean, you and I have talked a lot about developing a rule of life.
Yeah.
And it seems like you're incorporating a ton of that.
Yeah. It's all,
So like, for people that maybe they're listening, like, what are you talking about? Rule of life?
Yeah.
I think it was Pete Scazzaro, and correct me. I mean, you've been reading this probably as long as I have, but he talks about the rule of life as like that piece of
the trellis.
The trellis,
it's the trellis. Yep.
And it's just a way for you to intentionally grow towards God.
Yeah.
It's creating these rhythms.
Yep.
A vine is going to grow in some direction. Yeah. The way to guide it in a healthy direction is the trellis for it to grow in as well.
Who do you like? What systems do you have in your life that help you become who you feel like God is calling you to be?
Yeah.
And then what are the systems for that? Like what is the trellis for that you do?
Yeah.
So
that's great. Love it.
Yeah.
I would be curious to hear a little bit more about the research that Biola does. And
dude, it's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, it really like.
What do you feel like if you were to be like, here's the thing that a pastor should take away from this?
I would say that everything that their research showed me was I wasn't crazy. I knew what we were talking about when we built 1010. It helped give me language that what I felt wasn't crazy. So for instance, the research broke down a pastor's job and said if you were to break down a lead pastor's job, you could break it down into 13 different categories. If you took those 13 different categories and then broke them down into individual unique tasks, it would be 64 unique tasks. The researcher was like, good luck. Like nobody's made for this.
That's why there's so much burnout.
That's why there's so much burnout. And what they talk about is the effects on pastors of caring for people are so much greater on a pastor than a normal person because most pastors are isolated. The reason most pastors are isolated is because everyone in our world either works for us, goes to our church, is on our board, and we feel like we have to be this person that is always on. And so we're never able to really talk to anybody about. I mean, I was just telling my buddy G, who's sitting over there, after the session we were just in, I was sitting with this lady and her husband committed suicide 6 months ago.
Wow.
Oh my God.
And she is telling me all this stuff. And dude, and he was a pastor. And she's like, our church ran him into the ground and he was bipolar and he killed himself 6 months ago. And I was like, how are you doing? She's like, well, I'm back at work. And I looked at her, I go, I go, so you're back at work at the church that you just said to me drove your husband into the ground to commit suicide. I said, I'm either really impressed by you or really terrified for you.
Yeah.
One of the two things.
Yeah.
And so that, like, all of that sort of stuff, like, there's a part of me, like, I prayed for her. I mean, you know me well, so I'm always cry. So I'm like crying for this lady. And all I'm thinking about is, like, there is a sweet lady who's an executive of a church that her husband took his life. And she said, and now what I'm wrestling with is I may always be alone.
Wow.
That was a conversation I just had.
Yeah.
So what the research shows is there's trauma, right? There's trauma that all of us have in life. There's a difference between big T trauma and small T trauma. There's something also called secondary trauma. So that when you sit with someone and they tell you something like that, it stays with you, man.
Yeah.
Like you carry it.
Yeah.
What they found was very unique for pastors is there's something called tertiary trauma. Because we believe that every person is made in the image of God, we kind of carry this weight a little bit with us. So for instance, like if I was talking to a lady that I didn't know and she tells me about her daughter or her son, and their son is a drug addict, whatever, even though I've never met this guy, even though I've never heard his story, I still am going to carry a part of his wounds because I believe that young man was made in the image of God.
Yeah.
And so what they're saying is for pastors, the toll of hearing this stuff all the time has such a greater effect on us because we don't have the healthy outlets for it.
Yeah.
That's the other thing I would say that I have really seen over these past few years working with guys. For the love of God, don't hide behind spirituality.
Oh,
How many times have you talked
using God to hide from God?
Dude, it is the scariest thing for me when I know a guy that's in 1010 or not in 1010 that is truly dealing with some like horrendous stuff.
Yeah.
And you hear them explain it away in such a flippant way with Christian platitudes to make it more palatable to himself. And you know, he's really not dealing with it.
Yeah.
So we had a guy, he found out one of his really trusted friends who was on his team was financially stealing from his church. This is recently. And I called him and I was checking on him about it. And I said, dude, how are you doing? Everything going okay? He goes, you know what I always say? You can't steal from a giver. And I was like, what the heck are you talking about, dude? Like,
wow.
Like I'm like, you're just burying this. Like you just got betrayed by one of your good friends. He's stealing money from the church. And instead of you actually wrestling with grief, which we all should, there's a whole book of the Bible named Lamentations.
Yeah.
Like you're just wrapping it up in this weird spiritual stuff. And I think that's a lot of it too, is we don't want to deal with pain, grief, and we don't want to lament. So we just move past it as fast as we can.
Yeah. On to the next.
Yeah. And here's the problem. It doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Yeah.
It's still there.
Yeah.
You have to deal with this stuff.
Yeah.
You can't go, you can't not.
That's great.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, I know you're in the process of releasing a book that talks about grief.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about
I did
it.
endorse that book.
You did endorse that.
You know
book.
what, Josh? I don't endorse books. I endorse people.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So the book comes out April 8th. It is done. I recorded the audiobook, which is a terrible just experience.
How long did that take?
9 hours.
9 hours of just talking.
Just talking, reading.
2 days or?
No, I did it in one day.
Oh my.
Are you hearing yourself?
Oh yeah. And you have a producer listening to you through the glass. So anytime you like flow a word or a sentence,
They stop you.
Go
they
back.
stop you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you didn't say that right. My guy said numerous times, that's not how you pronounce that. Like that's what he said to me. And then it's a weird thing because you're trying to read clearly, but you're also trying to read in the arc of the sentence to like fluctuate your voice. Dude, you just miss words, missay stuff. Did
your emotions ever hit you?
Oh,
while you were
dude.
reading?
Yeah. So I
was wondering about that. When you told me you were going to read, I was like, this is like his life story.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, really hard things.
Oh,
in there.
yeah,
I'm
dude.
like, I wonder if he's just reading this like it's just sterile or is it like.
So I actually had a talk.
Through the
I
tears.
imagine you
Oh, dude.
in the corner with tears, just weeping like a child.
There was definitely times of that. I was, I actually talked to the producer beforehand, I said, hey man, I said, this story, the book's called Into the Storm. Kind of the thesis of a book is a buffalo is the only animal in the animal kingdom. When a storm comes, it turns its shoulders and goes directly into the storm. And so kind of the whole idea of the book is, what would it be like for us to be like a buffalo? And when a storm comes, go directly into the storm. Don't try to outrun it. Don't try to herd up, and trust the God of the storm.
Wow.
So it is the story of a severely special needs daughter. So she's had 33 surgeries. So our journey with her, I got my wife pregnant. We weren't married at Florida State University. So I got a degree and a kid from Florida State University. She actually got pregnant. Yeah, and showed up 3 weeks later at my door. Massive church hurts from my former pastor. And so it's just our story, all of it with a biblical narrative. So I had a talk with the producer. I go, hey man, I'm going to get emotional. I said, I don't want to take that out unless it's like distracting.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, I don't want you to either. Oh, bro, there were multiple times that I'm like, oh God, I got to get a hold of myself. Like, I mean, we had to stop recording. There was one in particular when our daughter Riley was born. Dang it. The doctors told us she would never live past her first birthday. Mm-hmm. And without telling me, my wife went and bought a 3-year-old's t-shirt and put it in the back of her closet.
Wow.
And kept that 3-year-old's t-shirt in Riley's closet for years. Riley's about to be 17 in February. And that story's in the book of us putting that t-shirt on her for the first time at 3 years old, and like being God's miracle. Yeah. And I'm just like, I mean, you definitely hear the voice quiver in certain chapters, and
that's awesome.
My wife really helped me write it. She is a phenomenal ghostwriter. I write like at a 5th grade accelerated level. And so it's a really good book, dude. Like,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I think it's going to help a lot of people.
Yeah.
I hope so. I mean, you just kind of write it and you're like, well, here you go.
Yeah.
It's going to be awesome, man. I've heard you tell your story a million times.
Yeah.
Circles at churches or around the fire or whatever, and just seeing the impact of it.
I think the thing that's unique for us as well in our journey, our buddy Jason Kimbrough said this to me one time when I preached for him. He said, you're one of the only people that I know here talk about suffering and you're still in it. Like you're not on the other side of it. Like my daughter's still special needs. She has another surgery coming up in a couple months. Like it'll be number 34. And he's like, most pastors tell their story on the other side of suffering.
Yeah. Wow.
He goes, you're telling your story of suffering while still suffering.
Yeah. I think one of the things is so, that I love about how open and vulnerable you and Becca are with your story is that I don't want to throw like a massive shade on the church when I say this, but I think in the West, there is a lack of a good theology around suffering.
Yeah.
And whenever you guys share your story, it's like, we're still in it. And so I think that resonates with so many people, because it's hard when you're in the middle of suffering and you hear somebody get up and they're just on the other side of it telling you how amazing that is.
Or it's a message that builds your faith, but it feels more like hype than help when you're in the middle of it as well.
Oh yeah, dude.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, we're talking about how do we do this for pastors. But as a pastor, how do you help your people have that theology of suffering? Or maybe even the right expectation of suffering as a Christian? Because I think that is half the problem.
I think that is a very loaded question because, man, how do I answer this? I'm trying to answer this and not give a bunch of theological slants. Here's what I've learned about suffering. This is the best way I know to put it. This is where I land. God is God, and God can do whatever he wants at any time. And whatever God is doing, he is always doing for the greater good of me and him. Like there's nothing that God will do, cause, or allow in my life that is not for the greatest good for me.
Yeah.
It may not look anything like I think it should.
Yeah.
What a lot of people do, and this is the best way I know how to like describe it. And I think it's because I went on this journey for 5 years. You remember this when we had Riley, my theology went out the door, and I went on these massive like journeys of theology and became a absolute head case. Like I could argue myself with the Bible.
Yeah.
Like you would give me a verse and I'd be like, what about this one? And it didn't help me at all. Like, and so what I think all of us do is everybody at some level, we all construct God in some sort of box in our heart. Yeah. And as long as God operates the way that I think he should within that box, I feel safe.
Yeah.
Suffering has a way of destroying boxes. And so then what you're left with is either God is not who I thought he was, or I'm not good enough, and that's why God's allowing this, or kind of where I ended up landing is very much in the mysteries of the Lord. I don't know. But at the end of the day, I know Jesus is good. And I tell people all the time, I feel like my job as a preacher, I guess an author now, is no matter what happens, God's character does not change.
Yeah.
And I think so many times we think that God's character changes based off of our circumstances, and God's character does not change based off of our circumstance. God is who he is all the time. So if God is doing something or allowing something, whatever your theological slant is, if God is causing or allowing something in your life that is not good, it does not mean that God has not changed. It may be something that you just don't understand. Mm-hmm. And so like I look at, for instance, when my pastor of 17 years turns on me, went nuts, Jason walked with me through that whole thing. I would not be who I am today without the pain of that moment.
Yeah.
And I would not have realized that I actually loved ministry more than I loved Jesus.
Wow.
And so God, whether he caused it or allowed it, allowed me to be wounded enough to be like, hey, I love you enough to not let you believe that this is okay.
Wow.
And the only way that you were ever the only way I would have ever gotten to that, I think, is to be betrayed and hurt, and what defined me taken away from me for me to realize that it wasn't Jesus that defined me.
Wow.
And I think that was painful and really crappy and really hard, and I did not like it, and I did not think it was good. But 5 years later, 6 years later now, I can look back and go, oh no, man, that was really good.
Yeah.
Like it was painful.
Yeah.
And you don't minimize the pain. And so I think it's talking honestly about it. It's okay to say things suck and Jesus is good. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like not everything has to have a bow on it.
Yeah.
Not everything, like that's the Bible.
Yeah.
Like and so I remember I used to have this question. You've heard me tell a story a bunch, but I used to have this question I'd always ask pastors when we had our daughter Riley. Did God cause it or allow it? I was actually telling my buddy G about it. Did God cause this or allow it? I go, and I would sit with pastors. I can go Psalms 139. She's fearfully and wonderfully made, and God made her this way. I go, or I can go Romans 8:28. God's going to work it together for good for those that love him and called according to his purpose. And this is just the result of sin in the world. What is it? And dude, I asked that question to tons of pastors. And what I started realizing is I'm getting answers just based off of that pastor's theological slant. I'd have some guys go, well, God would never allow or cause anything like that. And I'm like, well, he's sovereign, so he has to allow it.
Yeah.
Like he's sovereign, so that doesn't work out. And then if he allows it, does that mean he wanted it?
Yeah.
Well, wouldn't allowance and causation be the same thing then in that moment? So I'm just a massive head case, which I think allowance and causation are opposite sides of the same coin, but that's a whole nother thing. That's another talk for another time.
The next podcast.
That's your coloring book that's coming out.
It's a scratch and sniff. But I got to spend 3 days with N.T. Wright in St. Andrews, Scotland. And I'm sitting with N.T. Wright and I'm thinking, okay, here is probably the greatest living New Testament theologian on the planet right now. So I'm like, he goes by Tom in the UK. N.T. I guess is his book name. And I go, Tom, I have a special needs daughter. She was born that way. I can go Psalms 139. I can go Romans 8:28. What is it? Bro, he's the only person that gave me this huge circular answer, did not answer my question, and looked at me and goes, that's not fair to you, but that's all I got. And it hit me in this moment. If N.T. Wright is okay with the mysteries of God, I should probably be okay with the mysteries of the Lord.
Wow.
And so what I tell people all the time when it comes to suffering, we always get stuck in a question. The question we get stuck in with suffering is why. Yeah. Unless you're making like dumb choices, which you need to figure out, why will not take you to the place that you want to go.
Yeah.
So what we started asking as a family instead of why is, God, what do you want me to do with this?
Yeah.
And
great.
Becca and I felt like with Riley, and now more of our story are, what do you want me to do with this? And I don't say this like in a weird fatalistic sort of way. I feel like part of my family's calling on this side of eternity is to suffer and point to Jesus and to suffer in a public way. Yeah. Like not in like a, weird public way, but to like let people know, yeah, man, life's hard. My daughter's had a ton of surgeries. I've made a bunch of mistakes. I've been through a lot of hard times, and God is still good. And and just be honest.
It's a witness.
Just be honest.
Yeah.
You're being a witness is at the end of the day, it's like you guys are walking through it and you're pointing people to Jesus. That is a witness, and it's a calling.
Yeah.
And
I feel like I could learn a lot from the Lord by like winning the lottery, but like this is apparently what he's given me. You know what I mean? Like,
he knows what you would do and what you would become.
Oh, bro, for sure.
You would buy so many beanies.
I'd be on a jet boat shirtless right now.
Jet boat.
Hey, well, before we wrap up, two things. One is 1010 Project. How can people find out more about that?
Yeah, go to 1010project.com, the number 10 and then the word 10 project.com. Probably could have figured out how to do that easier, but that's what I do.
Copy.
Yeah. And so you can look at it on there. And then if you're interested, basically you fill out the form and you do a phone call with me.
Cool.
And we talk about it, and that's it.
That's awesome. And then when the book comes out?
April 8th. And so you can buy it right now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target.
Are you going to do one of those things where you go to Barnes & Noble and you get all your books and sign them and put them back in there?
100%.
I want to go with you and do that.
I'm telling you.
Take pictures of ourselves and put pictures in there too.
But I'm just going to have you sign my name. I told my wife, there's two things I want to do. Like when we were going through we were dealing with our publisher and when we were talking about promotion, I was like, listen, I'm not a good self-promoter. Like I don't. So if you're looking for me to do that, I'm probably not your guy. But I did tell my wife, but there are two things I'm going to do. I said, I'm going to go into a Barnes & Noble and sign one and put it on the shelf, back on the shelf.
You got to do it.
And I said, and then I'm always going to have a couple of books with me and just sign them and write like a prayer and like leave them. Just leave them in public places and just be like, whatever.
Let someone pick it up.
And so, and just hope someone picks it up. And so those are the two things that I know I will do. And then make a bunch of iron-on t-shirts. No, I'm just playing.
Airbrush. You need airbrush t-shirts, dude.
Panama City 97.
There you
that's
go.
What they look like.
Heck yeah.
Oh, man.
Oh, man. Thanks for being on here, bro.
No, dude.
It's going to be helpful.
Love you, boys. So.
Cheers.
That's a wrap.